Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So we're going to continuing what I feel like it's Series Port Authority, where I go over some of the best arcade games as well as their home console ports, show you the differences between the two, and talk about which the best one is to play. And it should come as no surprise that I felt like talking about Soul Calibur, because the difference between the arcade original and the Dreamcast port is night and day different. Maybe one of the best masterclasses in arcade porting to a home console. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Soul Calibur started its life on a PlayStation 1 based arcade board, so obviously the generational leap between PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast is going to be huge. And that is not to say that the PlayStation 1 version in arcades is any sort of slouch. It really pushed the hardware to its absolute limits and got some good results out. But when previews for Soul Calibur came out and when people got this on their Dreamcast at launch, it was just absolutely mind-blowing that video games could look this good at home. This is one of those examples in which the home port just absolutely decimates the arcade original in every way, shape, and form you could possibly imagine. And even though this is a launch game for Dreamcast, it still looks like one of the best games visually, in my opinion, that the Dreamcast was ever able to experience. Now moving over to the MAME side of things, there is a weird glitch in MAME where if you're in progressive mode, the game will run twice as fast, and I'm actually showing that to you here, because if you move over to interlace mode, it does like to hang a little bit and do some bad screen tearing. In some ways, this is a very fun way to play the game. It almost feels like Soul Calibur Turbo, like Capcom went in and changed it around. I know it's not made by Capcom, but just think about Street Fighter Turbo. There is some charm to play the game this way, and if you get an original arcade board, it will certainly play at the normal speed, but this is me slowing the footage down ever so slightly to try to get the counter to go at exactly the same rate as the Dreamcast version of the game. So this is a closer approximation to what you would experience if it was running 100% correct. But we're really here to talk about the visual difference between the Dreamcast version and the PlayStation 1 version, because this is just another example of how much more powerful the Dreamcast was than any other piece of hardware on the market at the time. Dreamcast beat pretty much every other arcade board outside of Sega's own offerings once it released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 in North America. You'll see immediately almost all of the backgrounds are now comprised of full 3D polygonal models versus the static 2D images on the Soul Calibur arcade side of things, and that just adds so much more depth and kind of vibe to the image. You really do feel like you're seeing into the background. Now that's not to say that all of the elements on the PlayStation 1 version are 2D backgrounds. They do use polygons for some stages to give it that depth as well, and you will see between the two the lighting model changes ever so slightly. I would say that they both look good, and the PlayStation 1 version does have those pseudo real-time lighting effects. It is just a difference in which the overall model geometry and the detail and resolution on screen are completely different, because you move back over to Dreamcast and suddenly it just comes to life with this visual imagery that looks so incredible. Not to talk about the fact that all of the characters are going to be made out of way more polygons, and their clothing is going to have a much more natural flow to it. So if we put these side by side, one stage versus the other, you will see the difference both in the lighting as well as the overall graphical capabilities. And I don't even need to tell you which one's PlayStation 1 based and which one's Dreamcast. That is very obvious and apparent right here. And this is not a knock on the arcade version whatsoever. I still think it's an incredibly good looking game for PlayStation 1 based hardware, and honestly the gameplay is still Soul Calibur, so no matter what version you play, you're of course going to have a very fun time doing it. But this is just one of those historical instances in which a home console port just was the way to play. Once Dreamcast released and we got this port, the arcade version basically became obsoleted, and big credit to Namco for recognizing an opportunity in taking an incredibly popular arcade game, bringing it home and giving it such a massive overhaul in the visuals and gameplay department. They took the time to make this thing absolutely shine on Dreamcast, and it 100% shows. And this is definitely not the only example of a game that got a lot better when it got a home console port. I'm sure we'll talk about at least one more game where the arcade experience is going to be secondary to your home consoles. But the best part about this is it's still Soul Calibur, and if you've ever played this game before, you know it is still one of the best 3D fighting games ever made. This is just absolutely a game that still holds up no matter how you play it, and again with the weird MAME glitch running it at double speed, it kind of feels like a different version of the game, something that you should play play after you play the Dreamcast original. Because your response time needs to be much quicker, your input window is going to be completely different. It does have a sensation and feel that's kind of familiar yet completely different at the same time. But speaking of similar yet different, let's give a sound sample. First we're going to go over the Dreamcast version, then we'll move over to PlayStation 1 arcade base, so go ahead and listen to both, and I'll come back and ask you which one you like better.
Versus Taku. Battle 1, fight! Out of the ring! This victory strengthened the soul of Sophitia. You win! Battle 1, fight! This victory strengthens the soul of Sophitia. You win!
Honestly, I think both sound great, and there is a big difference in the overall storage capacity. The ROM for something like Soul Calibur on MAME is going to be around 32 megabytes, where the GDI image for Soul Calibur on Dreamcast is near to 700 megabytes. So obviously, the PlayStation 1 based arcade hardware could get some great audio out, even if it lost the CD format. But the visuals are really where the fundamental difference in the two versions come from. And this must have been one hell of a port, because all of the models have been completely redone. You can see the night and day difference in the overall detailed imagery, and even how the wind and other weather affects the clothing on the characters. That was something that we didn't see this fluid for a long time. Sure, you had stuff like Model 3 in the arcades, and it could get pretty close to it, but when you got to Dreamcast, some of the physics on the models are just things that we really hadn't experienced before. And while the clothing in the arcade version definitely does move around here and there, it is not in any way to the level of something that the Dreamcast could pull off. And that's how much of an evolutionary leap that hardware truly was. And I still remember to this day getting my original imported Japanese Dreamcast. I spent my money mowing lawns at the summer, getting a Dreamcast a year early. I had this game imported, and I absolutely played the ever-loving hell out of it. It was so much fun to be able to have this level of graphical fidelity in my bedroom as a kid, because it usually felt like you had to go to the local arcade to even get close to what the Dreamcast was able to pull off. And Soul Calibur was in my local arcade, the Dream Machine. That's where I played it first, and I was definitely looking forward to it coming to Dreamcast, but until you would actually experience what the Dreamcast could do, you didn't really think it was going to be that much better than what you saw in arcades. And this again is still a very pretty game. The PlayStation 1 hardware was super versatile, and with its expanded format in arcade boards, it could definitely punch above its weight in the home console space. So to say that Soul Calibur on PlayStation 1 in arcades is a good game would be an understatement. It is still the same incredible game. And the fun part is everything is basically identical as far as the content is concerned. You're going to get the exact same in-engine cutscene when you go to the boss character on the PlayStation 1 version as you are on the Dreamcast version, so it's so much fun to directly compare them side by side to see exactly what they look like. The lighting model here is better, maybe slightly brighter than I think it should be, but that was definitely a Dreamcast vibe visually. But you will see the boss here, his sword and everything about him, even those fire effects, is so much improved based upon the original. It really does feel like this is a sequel to the PlayStation 1 based arcade game, even though it is one-to-one content identical. And I would say these fire effects here and the overall Aurora Borealis in the background look so much better on Dreamcast than they do on the arcade original. And that's why it's so much fun to compare these things. I'm not really looking for a winner or to say one company's hardware was better than the others. It's more talking about the historical context of how these things came out and how they do vary and yet remain similar. The PlayStation 1 arcade version is a ton of fun to play, and if you do have an original arcade board, it's probably one that you take out very often. And with that MAME glitch, again, the overall speed up is a completely different vibe, and it's one that I really enjoyed. I would love to see a few competitive Soul Calibur players take on some matches within this completely too fast version of the game. But for all intents and purposes, the Dreamcast version absolutely 100% makes the PlayStation 1 arcade original obsolete. There's no reason if you're going to buy just one of these games you'd want to go to the arcade version of it, unless you're an arcade collector that absolutely loves PlayStation 1 and absolutely despises Dreamcast, and even if you are, you probably still have a Dreamcast with a copy of this game, because pretty much everybody who has a Dreamcast collection has a copy of Soul Calibur in it. This is a masterclass on how to port a game. It is 10 out of 10 good, it's 10 out of 10 improved, and I still think it's probably within the top 10 best 3D arcade fighting games of all time. Leave me a comment down below and tell me where you would rank it. But short of that, that's Port Authority on Soul Calibur PlayStation 1 Arcade versus Dreamcast. I'll have another episode soon, but we're done, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.